A choice that changed everything. What would you do if you had only $10 left to your name? Would you spend it on yourself, trying to make it last a little longer, or would you give it away to someone who might need it even more? This is the story of Jake Carter, a struggling single father who made a choice. A simple act of kindness on a rainy night changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. He had no idea that the woman he handed his last $10 bill to was no ordinary homeless person. She was Sophie Davenport, a billionaire trying to understand the world beyond her wealth. What followed was a journey of love, redemption, and second chances. A tale of a man who had given up on believing in miracles and a woman who had everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy. As their worlds collided, barriers were broken, trust was tested, and two souls found solace in the most unexpected places. But will Jake be able to accept help without feeling like he's losing himself? And will Sophie, a woman used to control, learn to love without fixing what isn't broken? This is not just a love story, it's a testament to the power of human connection, to the beauty of taking chances, and to the idea that sometimes the most life-changing moments come when we least expect them. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt stories that touch the soul and leave a lasting impression, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. And now, let's begin the story of a struggling single dad and the billionaire who would change his life forever. A struggling single dad gave his last $10 to a homeless woman, unaware. She was a billionaire Jake. Carter tightened his jacket against the biting cold as he stepped out of the mechanic shop where he worked long hours for minimal pay. The December air cut through him like a knife, but he had long since grown used to discomfort. His life had been a constant battle ever since his wife walked out 7 years ago, leaving him alone with their newborn son, Max. He had learned to survive on little, stretching every dollar to ensure Max never went to bed hungry. Tonight, however, was different. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the last crumpled $10 bill he had. It wasn't payday yet, and this was all that stood between him and an empty stomach. His son was already taken care of, he made sure of that. But for himself, he had resigned to a meal of tap water and maybe a stale piece of bread at home. As he trudged toward the bus stop, his tired eyes caught sight of a figure huddled against the wall of a closed convenience store. A woman, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, sat curled up on the cold pavement, her arms wrapped around her knees for warmth. Her dark hair was matted from the drizzle that had turned into sleet, and her frail hands trembled as she held out a small cardboard sign. "Anything helps." Jake paused. He had walked past dozens of homeless people before, always feeling guilty that he didn't have enough to help them. But tonight, something about this woman made him stop. Maybe it was the way her eyes, a striking blue, met his with quiet desperation, or perhaps it was just the sheer weight of knowing what it meant to struggle. With a sigh, he stepped toward her and held out the $10 bill. "Here," he said, his voice gruff from exhaustion. The woman blinked up at him, clearly surprised. "Are you sure?" Jake let out a humorless chuckle. "Not really, but you probably need it more than I do." She hesitated before reaching out with freezing fingers and taking the money. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but instead she looked down at the bill as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake shoved his hands into his pockets and gave her a small nod. "Stay warm." He turned and walked away before he could second-guess himself. His stomach protested the decision, but he ignored it. Hunger was temporary. Doing the right thing, that mattered more. As he stepped onto the nearly empty bus heading home, he didn't look back. If he had, he might have seen the woman staring after him, gripping the $10 bill like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Sophie Davenport sat motionless as she watched the man disappear into the cold night. She clenched the money in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she couldn't quite explain. This wasn't the first time she had been mistaken for a homeless woman this past week. That was, after all, the entire point of this ridiculous challenge her friends had dared her into. They wanted her to experience real life, to live on the streets for 7 days without access to her wealth, without her assistance, without her penthouse or designer clothes. It was supposed to be an eye-opening experiment, a game to them, a mere social experiment to pass the time between lavish charity galas and extravagant vacations. But it didn't feel like a game anymore. Sophie had spent 6 days on these streets, and in that time she had been ignored, dismissed, and even sneered at. No one had looked at her like she was a person. Until now, Jake Carter hadn't just given her money. He had seen her, her fingers tightened around the $10 bill, a lump forming in her throat. She had more money than she could ever spend in a lifetime. Her company, Davenport Industries, had a net worth in the billions, and yet here she was, trembling in the cold, with a stranger's last $10 in her hand. She had to find him again. Jake arrived home to the sound of laughter coming from the small living room. His heart instantly lightened. No matter how exhausted or hungry he was, hearing Max's laugh was enough to push the weight of the world off his shoulders. "Daddy!" Max ran up to him as he entered the tiny apartment, his face lighting up with joy. "Look what I made!" Jake knelt down as Max proudly held up a piece of paper with crayon drawings all over it. There, in bright blue and red scribbles, was a picture of the two of them standing in front of a house with a big sun shining above. "This is our dream house," Max explained. "The one we're gonna have one day." Jake swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He forced a smile and ruffled his son's messy blonde hair. "It's perfect, buddy." Max beamed and ran back to the couch, excitedly telling Jake about the cartoon he was watching. Jake exhaled and leaned against the counter, rubbing a hand down his tired face. He wished he could give Max that house, a backyard to play in, a life without worries. But for now, all he could do was keep going, one day at a time. As he sat down beside his son and pulled him into a hug, he pushed away the image of the woman on the street. He had done what he could. That was all that mattered. Little did he know, his act of kindness had just set into motion a series of events that would change his life forever. Sophie Davenport sat in the warmth of her penthouse, staring at the $10 bill still clutched between her fingers. The city skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but for the first time in her life, she felt distant from it. Her mind was still on the man who had given her his last bit of money without hesitation, a man who had nothing to spare, yet still gave freely. She had never encountered someone quite like Jake Carter. The challenge was over. She could return to her normal life now, her meetings, her investments, her carefully curated existence. But something about that night refused to leave her. Sophie had spent days living on the streets, experiencing firsthand how people ignored the homeless, how they walked past them without a second glance. But Jake, he had stopped. He had given. She needed to find him again. Jake woke up to the sound of his son's laughter filling their small apartment. Despite the weight of financial worries, Max's joy was infectious. Jake forced himself to push aside his exhaustion and focus on the most important thing, his son. "Dad, can we go to the park today?" Max asked, his wide blue eyes filled with excitement. Jake hesitated. His mind immediately calculated whether he had enough gas in his truck to get to the park and back. Money was tight, and every dollar counted, but then he thought about how much Max had been cooped up lately. He deserved a day outside. "Yeah, buddy," Jake said with a smile. "Let's go." They walked to the nearby park, Max running ahead, his laughter echoing through the crisp morning air. Jake sat on a bench, watching his son climb the jungle gym. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the stress that never truly left him, and that's when he saw her. Sophie stood near the entrance of the park, watching him. Jake's brows furrowed as he recognized the woman from the night before. She no longer looked homeless. Her hair was washed, and she wore a simple yet elegant coat. Something about her posture, the way she carried herself, told him she was someone accustomed to a different kind of life. She walked toward him, hesitating, for a brief moment before speaking. "Hi." Jake narrowed his eyes slightly. "Hey," Sophie offered a small smile. "I just wanted to thank you for what you did last night. You didn't have to give me anything, but you did." Jake shrugged. "It was just $10. "No," she said softly. "It wasn't just $10. It was everything you had." Jake felt his stomach twist. He wasn't used to people analyzing his actions, especially not a stranger he had met just once. "Why are you here?" he asked cautiously. Sophie hesitated before answering. "I wanted to see you again, and I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee." Jake blinked, surprised. He wasn't the kind of man who accepted handouts. He had pride, even if it was a battered and bruised thing, but there was something about the way she asked, something genuine. He glanced at Max, who was still playing happily, then back at Sophie. "All right," he said. "1 cup of coffee." They found a small coffee shop near the park. Jake ordered a black coffee, refusing to let Sophie pay for anything more. She didn't argue, simply studying him with those sharp blue eyes. "So," Jake said, after taking a sip of his coffee. "You're not homeless." Sophie let out a small laugh. "No, I'm not." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Care to explain?" Sophie hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Well, mostly honest. I was doing an experiment, living on the streets, for a few days, trying to understand what it's like." Jake frowned. "That sounds like a game rich people play." Sophie flinched. He wasn't wrong, but she shook her head. It wasn't a game, it was eye-opening. Jake studied her for a long moment. "And what did you learn?" "That people look away," Sophie admitted. "That it's easier to pretend someone doesn't exist than to acknowledge their suffering. Except for you." Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I guess I just know what it's like to struggle." Silence settled between them. Sophie glanced at Max, who was happily sipping a hot chocolate she had bought for him. Her heart softened at the sight of Jake's gentle way. "With his son, I'd like to help you, Jake," she said finally. Jake stiffened. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Sophie said. "It's gratitude." Jake looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't even know who you really are." Sophie took a deep breath. "Then let's change that." And just like that, something shifted between them. An unspoken agreement, a fragile connection. Neither of them fully understood yet, but it was there, waiting to unfold. Jake Carter wasn't sure why he had agreed to meet Sophie again. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was because there was something about her that didn't quite fit into the neat boxes life had taught him to categorize people into. Either way, here he was, standing outside the coffee shop waiting for her. Max was at school, which meant Jake had a rare morning to himself. The air was crisp, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted from inside the shop, making his stomach rumble. He hadn't had a real breakfast, just a quick cup of black coffee before rushing out the door. He glanced at his watch. 5 minutes past the agreed-upon time. Just as he was beginning to think she wouldn't show, Sophie appeared, walking toward him with a hesitant but warm smile. She was dressed simply, dark jeans, a sweater, and a navy blue coat. She looked nothing like the woman he had met in the cold that night, and yet there was something familiar in her eyes, something he still couldn't place. "Sorry I'm late," she said, slightly out of breath. "Traffic was terrible." Jake shrugged. "No worries." He held the door open for her, and they stepped inside. The warmth of the cafe enveloped them, and they found a small table by the window. Jake ordered his usual black coffee, while Sophie opted for a cappuccino. He watched as she added 2 packets of sugar, stirring absent-mindedly before looking up at him. "So," he started, "are you going to tell me who you really are?" Sophie hesitated, then set her cup down. "I told you the truth, mostly. I did spend a week living on the streets. It wasn't a game to me, Jake. It was a lesson." "A lesson in what?" Jake asked, his tone more skeptical than he intended. "In understanding," Sophie said softly. "People like me, we live in a completely different world. We talk about helping, about charity, but we never really see what it's like for the people who need that help. I wanted to see. I needed to see." Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And what did you find out?" "That I had no idea how hard it really is," she admitted, "and that kindness is rare." Jake exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He wanted to believe her. But he had spent too long struggling, too long seeing people with money throw around empty gestures and call it generosity. "So why are you here, really?" he asked. "What do you want from me?" Sophie smiled, but it was a sad sort of smile. "Maybe I just want to get to know the man who gave away his last $10 to a stranger." Jake shook his head, still skeptical but intrigued despite himself. "That sounds like something out of a movie." Sophie laughed softly. "Maybe, but I think you'll find I'm very real." Silence stretched between them for a moment, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative. Jake sipped his coffee, considering his next words carefully. "I don't know much about your world," he admitted. "But I know that in mine, nothing comes for free." "I'm not offering you anything for free," Sophie said, her voice steady. "Just a chance. A chance to see that not everyone with money is heartless." Jake studied her for a long moment, before finally nodding. "All right, Sophie, let's see where this goes." And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone was out to take something from him. Maybe some people just wanted to give. As they lingered over their drinks, Sophie shifted in her chair. "Tell me about Max," she said. Jake's face softened immediately. "Max is my world. He's smart, curious, and way too energetic for me to keep up with sometimes. But he's the best thing that ever happened to me." Sophie smiled. "He sounds wonderful." "He is," Jake agreed. "I just wish I could give him more." Sophie hesitated before asking, "Like what?" Jake sighed. "A stable life. A real home. Not a tiny apartment with second-hand furniture and the constant worry of bills piling up." Sophie traced the rim of her cup thoughtfully. "But you give him love, right?" Jake looked up, surprised. "Of course, every single day." "Then you're giving him more than a lot of people ever could," Sophie said softly. "Money doesn't make a home, Jake. Love does." Jake stared at her, something stirring in his chest that he couldn't quite place. He had spent so long feeling like a failure, measuring his worth by the amount of money he could or couldn't provide. But Sophie's words made him pause. "Maybe," he murmured. "But love doesn't pay rent," Sophie chuckled. "Fair point." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments before Sophie spoke again. "I want to meet Max someday." Jake blinked, caught off guard. "Why?" "Because he sounds like an incredible kid," Sophie said simply. "And because I'd like to get to know the people who matter to you." Jake hesitated, his instincts telling him to be cautious. But there was something in Sophie's gaze, something genuine, and for the first time in a long while he felt like someone truly saw him. "Maybe," he said. "We'll see." Sophie smiled, satisfied for now. She had taken a step forward, and so had he. It wasn't much, but it was enough for today. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Jake Carter wasn't one to trust easily. Life had hardened him, and years of struggling had taught him that people didn't help without expecting something in return. But Sophie Davenport wasn't like anyone he'd ever met. The morning after, Their coffee shop meeting, he found himself thinking about her more than he should. There was something about her honesty, her curiosity, that unsettled him. He had spent so long believing that people like her, people with money, saw the world through a different lens, one where struggles like his were nothing more than statistics in a charity report. But Sophie had listened, really listened. Shaking off the thoughts, he focused on his work at the auto repair shop. The place was barely keeping afloat, and Jake knew his boss had been considering layoffs. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Max depended on him. That afternoon he worked tirelessly, his hands covered in grease, his muscles aching from hours of lifting and tightening bolts. The familiar rhythm of work kept his mind occupied until his co-worker Mike nudged him. "Hey, man, some fancy-looking lady was out front earlier," Mike said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She didn't come in, just stood outside like she was thinking about something. Then she left." Jake froze. "What did she look like?" Mike shrugged. "Dark hair, kind of elegant, even in just jeans and a coat. Seemed out of place here." Jake's stomach tightened. Sophie. Sophie, meanwhile, sat in her office, staring at the city skyline. She had always been good at problem-solving. It was what made her such a successful businesswoman. But for the first time in a long while, she wanted to use her influence to help someone in a way that wasn't just a tax write-off. She had done her research. Jake had once been a promising engineering student before life threw him off course. Now he was stuck in a cycle he couldn't escape. But what if she could change that? Picking up her phone, she made a call. "I need someone to offer a job opportunity," she said, her tone all business. "A man named Jake Carter, skilled, hard-working, but overlooked. I want him to have a fair chance, without him knowing where it came from." She wasn't sure why she was doing this. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was gratitude, or maybe, just maybe, it was something deeper she wasn't ready to admit. Jake was exhausted when he picked up Max from school that afternoon. But as soon as his son ran to him with a bright smile, he felt some of the weight lift. "Dad, guess what? We had a special activity today." Max beamed, showing off a crayon drawing. "It's you and me in our dream house." Jake's throat tightened. Max's dream had always been simple, to have a real home, a place where they belonged. "I love it, buddy," he said, ruffling his son's hair. As they walked home, Jake's phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. "Mr. Carter." A professional voice greeted him. "I'm calling from a manufacturing firm. We received your application and would love to schedule an interview." Jake frowned. I don't remember applying." "Well, someone submitted your credentials. Your experience is impressive, and we'd like to discuss a position." Jake's heart pounded. A real job, a chance for stability. But who had done this? He had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Later that night, as Max slept soundly, Jake sat at the small kitchen table, staring at his phone. He debated calling Sophie, confronting her. But deep down, he knew she had meant, well, and maybe, just this once, he could accept a helping hand without feeling like it came with strings attached. Instead of dialing her number, he simply whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in a long time, hope flickered inside him. Next morning, he found himself at a crossroads. He could ignore the call, pretend none of this had happened, and go back to the life he knew. Or he could take a chance. Max's drawing sat on the kitchen table beside him, a reminder of the dream they both shared. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his phone and called the number back. "This is Jake Carter," he said. "I'd like to schedule that interview." Far across the city, in a high-rise office, Sophie sat at her desk, a small smile forming on her lips as she saw a notification pop up on her screen. The first step had been taken. Jake Carter never thought much about fate, but as he walked into the interview at the manufacturing firm, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was happening in his life. He had never applied for this job, Yet here he was, standing in a polished office, surrounded by professionals who spoke to him with respect he wasn't accustomed to. The hiring manager, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, extended a hand. "Jake Carter, right? We've been looking at your experience. Your mechanical knowledge and problem-solving skills are exactly what we need." Jake swallowed, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being wanted in this way. "Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Just curious. How'd you get my application?" The manager smiled. "A reference came through. Someone who believes in you. They said you're hard-working and just need a chance." Jake's jaw tightened. "Sophie." He wanted to be angry, but as the manager started talking about the role, the salary, the benefits, stability for Max, he realized he couldn't afford pride right now. He nodded, shook the man's hand, and accepted the job. Sophie sat in her high-rise office staring at her phone. She resisted the urge to text Jake to ask how the interview went. Instead, she focused on the reports in front of her. But she found herself rereading the same sentence over and over. Her assistant, Claire, poked her head into the office. "Sophie, you have the board meeting in 20 minutes. "Right," Sophie muttered, closing the report. But before Claire could leave, Sophie added, "Claire, if someone helped you when you were at your lowest, would you resent them for it?" Claire frowned. "I suppose it depends on how they helped. If they made me feel like a charity case, maybe. But if they genuinely believed in me, I'd be grateful." Sophie nodded, processing Claire's words. That evening, Jake picked up Max from school, and for the first time in a long while, he had good news. "Dad," Max ran up, throwing his arms around him. "Guess what? I got a gold star in class today." Jake grinned, ruffling Max's hair. "And guess what? I got a job today." Max's eyes widened. "A real job? Like a cool one?" Jake laughed. "Yeah, buddy, a real job." Max jumped in excitement. "Does that mean we can get extra ice cream tonight?" Jake shook his head with a chuckle. "Maybe just this once." As they walked home, a sense of hope settled over Jake. Maybe things were finally looking up. 2 days later, Sophie found herself outside Jake's apartment complex. She hadn't planned to be there, but somehow she had ended up in the neighborhood. Before she could overthink it, she sent him a text. "Sophie, hey, can we talk?" A moment later, her phone buzzed. "Jake, sure. Meet me at the park near my place." 15 minutes later, Sophie arrived to find Jake sitting on a bench, watching Max play on the jungle gym. She sat beside him, hesitating before speaking. "I heard you got the job." Jake glanced at her. "Yeah, you probably already knew." Sophie smiled lightly. "I was hoping you'd tell me yourself." Jake sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, Sophie, I know what you did. And I should be mad, but I'm not. He turned to face her. "I don't want to be someone's project." "You're not," Sophie said quickly. "I don't see you that way. I see you as someone who deserves more than life has given him." Jake studied her face, looking for any trace of pity, but he found none, just sincerity. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Sophie asked, "Would it be crazy if I said I'd like to see where this goes?" Jake's breath caught slightly. "Where? What goes?" Sophie laughed softly. "This, us." Jake exhaled, shaking his head. "You and me? We come from different worlds, Sophie." "Maybe," she admitted, "but I don't think that matters." Jake looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to consider the possibility of something good. "All right," he said finally, "let's see where this goes." And as Max called out for them to watch him slide down the biggest slide in the park, Jake realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. Jake Carter was no stranger to the feeling of unease. Life had taught him to be wary, to question when things seemed too good to be true. And lately, things had been going suspiciously well. His new job at the manufacturing firm was stable, well-paying, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was constantly drowning. Max was happier too, seeing his father less stressed, even if Jake was still adjusting to the sudden shift in fortune. But as he settled into his new role, little things started to bother him. His supervisor, who barely knew him, seemed almost too eager to take him under his wing. The job itself felt like it had been created with him in mind. And then there was the fact that Sophie kept showing up, sometimes at the coffee shop near his work, other times at the park, always just happening to be around. One evening, as he sat on his small balcony, sipping a beer and watching the city, "Lights!" his phone buzzed. Sophie. "Hey, how's the new job treating you?" Jake stared at the screen, debating how to respond. He appreciated what she had done for him, but something didn't sit right. Taking a breath, he finally typed back, "Jake, it's good, but I need to ask, did you have anything to do with me getting it?" The reply came almost instantly. "Sophie, what makes you ask that?" Jake exhaled sharply. That wasn't a denial. "Jake, I just need to know the truth, Sophie. No games." This time it took longer for her to respond. "Sophie, yes, I pulled some strings, but only to get your foot in the door. The rest was all you." Jake closed his eyes. He had known deep down, but seeing it confirmed left a bitter taste in his mouth. He should have been grateful. Hell, he was grateful, but the thought of being someone's project gnawed at him. The next day at work, his unease grew. The way people treated him, the knowing glances. Was he imagining it, or did they know about? Sophie? He hated feeling like a charity case, hated the idea that his achievements weren't entirely his own. That evening, after picking Max up from school, Jake found himself driving aimlessly. His son chattered beside him, unaware of his father's turmoil. "Dad, can we get burgers tonight?" Max asked, eyes hopeful. Jake forced a smile. "Sure, buddy." As they sat in the small diner, Max happily munching on fries, Jake's gaze flickered to his phone. Sophie hadn't messaged him since last night. Good. He needed space, but just as the thought crossed his mind, the door to the diner opened, and in walked Sophie. Jake stiffened. She hadn't seen him yet. She was scanning the room, her expression uncertain, as if she had debated coming in at all. Taking a deep breath, Jake stood and waved her over. There was no avoiding this. She hesitated before walking to their booth. "Hey," she said softly, "didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I," Jake said, his tone unreadable. "Have a seat." Sophie slid in across from him, offering Max a warm smile. "Hey, Max." "Hi, Miss Sophie," Max chirped, completely oblivious to the tension between the adults. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I need you to be honest with me, Sophie. Did you do more than just get my foot in the door?" She met his gaze, her blue eyes, unwavering. "No. I made sure they saw your resume, but I didn't influence anything beyond that." Jake studied her. He wanted to believe her, but trust didn't come easily to him. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why go out of your way for me?" Sophie hesitated, then said, "Because I believe in you, Jake. Because I saw a man who deserved a chance, and I had the means to help." Jake leaned back, crossing his arms. "And because you felt guilty?" Her jaw tightened. "No, this wasn't about guilt, it was about respect." Silence stretched between them. Then unexpectedly, Max spoke. "Miss Sophie, do you like my dad?" Jake choked on his drink. Sophie's eyes widened, caught completely off guard. Max blinked at both of them. "'Cause I think you do," Jake groaned. "Max, Sophie, to her credit," laughed softly. "You're a very observant kid." Max beamed. "I know." Jake rubbed his face. "Look, Sophie, He sighed. "I don't know how to feel about all this." "I understand," she said quietly. "But I'm not asking for anything, Jake. I just want to be in your life, if you'll let me." Jake looked at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "We'll see." Sophie smiled, and for the first time in days, the tension between them eased, and maybe, just maybe, Jake was beginning to realize that letting someone in wasn't the worst thing in the world. Jake Carter had always prided himself on his independence. Even when life knocked him down, he had refused to ask for help. But now, as he sat across from Sophie at the diner, he couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at him. He had lost control of his own life, and she had played a part in it. After their last conversation, he had tried to push away the thoughts of how Sophie had influenced his job. He wanted to believe her when she said she only gave him a chance, not a handout. But the doubt lingered, simmering beneath the surface. The days that followed their dinner meeting were tense. Jake avoided Sophie's texts, unsure of what to say. He kept his head down at work, focusing on his tasks and proving to himself more than anyone else that he deserved to be there. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, while grabbing a cup of coffee at the small shop near his workplace, Jake overheard two men from his office whispering near the counter. Their voices were hushed, but he caught enough to set his stomach on edge. "Lucky guy, huh? Lands a job like this out of nowhere." "Yeah, and with connections like her, I guess. Anything's possible." Jake felt his pulse quicken. He turned his head slightly, catching the men casting knowing smirks his way before heading out the door. He clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the coffee cup. It didn't take a genius to figure out who her was. Sophie. He had known. Deep down, he had known, but hearing it confirmed in someone else's voice made his stomach churn. He had spent years fighting to prove himself, to stand on his own, and now, was all of this just an illusion? A favor from a woman who pitied him? The coffee in his hand was forgotten as he stormed out of the shop, his feet moving on instinct. Before he knew it, he was standing outside Sophie's office building, staring up at the sleek glass exterior that seemed worlds away from his reality. He took a breath and marched inside. Sophie looked up from her desk, surprised when her assistant buzzed in. "Miss Davenport, Jake Carter is here to see you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Send him in." When Jake entered, his expression was unreadable, but there was tension in his shoulders that set her on edge. "Jake," she said, standing. How much?" he interrupted, his voice clipped. Sophie frowned. "What? How much did you pay them?" He crossed his arms. "How much did it cost you to buy me this job?" She flinched at the accusation. "I didn't buy you anything, Jake. I made sure your resume was seen. That's it. The rest was all you. Then why is everyone at work whispering about me? Why does it feel like I'm some charity case you decided to adopt?" Sophie's face hardened. "I didn't do this to insult you, Jake. I did it because I believe in you. And if other people are too small-minded to see your worth, that's on them, not me." Jake let out a humorless laugh. "Belief? Is that what this is? Because to me it feels like control. Like you're pulling the strings, and I'm just supposed to be grateful." Sophie's eyes flashed with frustration. "You think I wanted to be the reason you got this chance? I wanted you to get it on your own, Jake. But the world doesn't work that way. Sometimes people need a door opened for them." Jake shook his head. "I don't want your doors, Sophie. I don't want to be some pet project that makes you feel better about yourself." Her breath caught, pain flashing across her features. "Is that what you think this is? A project?" "I care about you, Jake." The words hung between them, heavy and unspoken for too long. But Jake, still raw from his realization, couldn't let them sink in. "Then stop helping me," he said quietly. "If you care about me, let me figure this out on my own." Sophie stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue, to make him understand, but she saw the walls rising around him. He wasn't ready. Finally, she nodded. "Okay." Jake exhaled, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. Without another word, he turned and walked out of her office, leaving Sophie standing alone, wondering if she had just lost him for good. That night, Jake sat alone in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. Max was asleep, unaware of the storm brewing in his father's mind. He should feel relieved. He had drawn his boundary, made it clear that he didn't want Sophie's help, so why did it feel like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? Jake Carter had never been one to dwell on the past. Life had taught him to move forward, to bury his emotions beneath layers of practicality. But as he sat alone in his apartment that night, the silence pressing in on him, he realized just how much he had lost. Max slept soundly in the next room, oblivious to the turmoil inside his father. Jake had always prided himself on shielding his son from life's harsher realities. But tonight, that weight felt unbearable. He stared at the worn edges of Max's latest drawing, a picture of the two of them standing in front of a house with a bright sun overhead. A dream he had promised to make real, yet seemed further away than ever. He had pushed Sophie away, and he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. Sophie sat in the back seat of her car, staring out at the city lights. The driver waited for instructions, but she gave none. She didn't want to go home, to be alone with her thoughts. The argument with Jake replayed over and over in her mind. The way his voice had hardened, the disappointment in his eyes. She had never meant to hurt him, only to help, but she realized now that her help had only driven him further away. The worst part was, she understood why. She had spent so long making decisions, decisive, strategic, never questioning whether they were right or wrong. She was used to taking control. But Jake wasn't another business venture. He was a man who had fought for every inch of his independence, and she had trampled over that without meaning to. Her phone buzzed in her lap. Claire's name flashed across the screen. "Hey," Sophie answered, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I just got word from the board," Claire said. "They're pushing for the expansion deal to go through by the end of the quarter. They need your final approval." Sophie sighed. Normally she would have been sharp, decisive, but tonight she felt drained. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" Claire hesitated. "Of course, but are you okay?" Sophie stared out the window, her thoughts drifting back to Jake. "I will be," she murmured. "Eventually." The next morning, Jake went through the motions of his routine, but everything felt off. At work, he caught himself staring at his tools, forgetting what he was supposed to be doing. His co-workers noticed the change, but said nothing. By lunchtime, he was exhausted. The weight of his decision hung over him like a storm cloud. Finally, he grabbed his phone and opened Sophie's eyes. Contact. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't do it. Not yet. Sophie, on the other hand, threw herself into work. Meetings, negotiations, business decisions. She kept herself busy, anything to keep her mind off Jake. But even as she tried to convince herself that it didn't matter, that she had done the right thing in stepping back, she couldn't escape the ache in her chest. By the time evening rolled around, she found herself outside Jake's apartment. She didn't remember deciding to come here. Her feet had just carried her. But now, standing in front of his door, she hesitated. What would she even say? Before she could decide, the door opened. Jake stood there, surprised. "Sophie," she swallowed hard. I was just passing by." He didn't look convinced. "Really?" Sophie let out a breath. "No, I needed to see you." He studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small but warm, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. Max's drawings were scattered on the table, and Sophie couldn't help but smile at them. The space felt lived in, real, so different from the sterile perfection of her penthouse. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what to say." Sophie met his gaze. "Then don't say anything. Just listen." She took a deep breath. "I never meant to make you feel like less, Jake. I only wanted to help because I saw something in you, something that deserved a chance. But I should have respected your pride, your independence." Jake's jaw clenched. "I know you meant—" "Well, but—" Sophie cut him off. "No excuses. I should have handled it differently." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Jake sighed. "I don't know where we go from here, Sophie." She nodded, her heart sinking. "Neither do I." She turned to leave, but before she could step out the door, Jake spoke. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" She turned back, surprised. "Are you sure?" Jake managed a small smile. "Yeah, I think Max would like it." Sophie's heart softened. Maybe this wasn't a resolution, but it was a step. And for tonight, that was enough. And just like that, the smallest spark of hope ignited between them again. The days after Sophie and Jake's tense conversation were quiet, but not in the way that brought peace. The air between them was filled with unresolved emotions, unspoken words, and questions neither was ready to ask. Yet, despite the uncertainty, Sophie found herself coming around more often, and Jake, while hesitant, didn't turn her away. One evening, as Jake left work, the exhaustion in his body felt heavier than usual. The day had been long, the machines in the shop temperamental, and his thoughts were still tangled in the uncertainty of where he and Sophie stood. He just wanted to go home, have dinner with Max, and shut out the world for a while. Fate had other plans. Jake was halfway across the parking lot when a loud crash echoed behind him. He turned just in time to see a forklift tipping dangerously to one side. One of his co-workers, a younger man named Tyler, was directly in its path, frozen in fear. Jake didn't think. He reacted. He lunged forward, shoving Tyler out of the way. Just as the forklift came crashing down, pain exploded in his leg as he felt the weight of something heavy clip him, sending him sprawling onto the concrete. Shouts rang out. Someone called for help. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the growing crowd of workers gathering around him. Sophie was in the middle of a meeting when her phone vibrated insistently on the table. She glanced at the screen, her breath catching when she saw the caller ID unknown number. Frowning, she excused herself and stepped into the hallway before answering. "Hello, Miss Davenport?" a voice asked. "This is St. Luke's Hospital. We have a patient here named Jake Carter. You were listed as his emergency contact." Her heart stopped. "What happened?" "He was involved in a workplace accident. He's stable, but has sustained injuries to his leg. We need you to come down." Sophie didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." When Sophie arrived at the hospital, she barely registered the sterile scent of antiseptic or the soft hum of machinery. Her only focus was finding Jake. She spotted Max sitting in a chair outside a hospital room, his small body curled up, his arms wrapped tightly around himself. Claire, who had come as soon as Sophie called, sat beside him, rubbing his back soothingly. Sophie knelt in front of him. "Max, sweetheart." Max looked up, his big eyes wet with unshed tears. "Is my dad going to be okay?" Sophie swallowed hard, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, he's strong. He'll be okay." A nurse approached. "You can go in now." Sophie nodded and stood, taking a deep breath before stepping into the room. Jake lay in the hospital bed, his leg wrapped in bandages, his face paler than she had ever seen it. But his eyes flickered open as she entered, and a slow smirk played at his lips. "Didn't expect to see you here." Sophie crossed her arms, fighting the lump in her throat. "You listed me as your emergency contact?" Jake shifted slightly. "Yeah, guess I did." Silence stretched between them before Sophie finally stepped closer. "You scared me," Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Didn't mean to." Sophie hesitated, then reached for his hand. "You're not alone, Jake. You never were. And you don't have to be." Jake held onto her fingers, his grip weak but steady. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he had to fight on his own. Hours later, as the night deepened, Sophie remained by Jake's bedside. He dozed in and out of consciousness, but every time he woke, she was still there. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. The weight of what had happened, of what could have happened, hung heavy between them. "I don't deserve this," Jake murmured at one point, his voice rough from exhaustion. Sophie frowned. "Don't say that," Jake exhaled slowly. "I've spent so long trying to do everything on my own. It's hard to let someone in." Sophie squeezed his hand gently. "Then let's start small, one step at a time." Jake met her gaze, and for once he didn't argue, he just nodded. Outside the room, Max curled into Claire's side, finally allowing himself to cry. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. And in the quiet hum of the hospital, a new understanding was born, one that neither Sophie nor Jake had fully grasped yet, but one that had already begun to change everything. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. Jake stirred awake, the dull ache in his leg a painful reminder of the accident. But beyond the pain, something else lingered, a feeling he couldn't quite define. A realization that life, as he knew it, had shifted in a way he could no longer ignore. As his vision cleared, he saw Sophie sitting in the chair beside his bed, her head resting against the armrest, asleep. She had stayed. Jake swallowed hard. The Sophie he had once believed to be a privileged woman with little understanding of hardship had proven him wrong at every turn. She had not only supported him in ways he didn't think he needed, but she had also refused to walk away, even when he tried to push her out. He wasn't used to that. To being chosen, to being worth staying for. For so long, he had convinced himself that people only stuck around when it was convenient. His past had been littered with betrayals, disappointments, and people who walked away when things got hard. But Sophie, she had seen him at his lowest, at his most vulnerable, and still, she was here. The thought sent a strange warmth through his chest, one he wasn't sure how to process. The soft creak of the chair made Sophie stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked disoriented before her gaze met his. Relief washed over, her face quickly followed by hesitation. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Jake shifted slightly, wincing. "Like I lost a fight with a truck," Sophie smirked. "Not far off." A small chuckle escaped him, but it quickly faded as silence settled between them. There was so much left unsaid, so many barriers still standing between them. Jake licked his lips, choosing his next words carefully. "I don't think I ever thanked you for staying." Sophie studied him, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to thank me, Jake." "I do," he insisted, "because I haven't exactly made things easy for you." Sophie sighed, leaning forward. "You think I don't know that I haven't seen how hard it is for you to accept help. But Jake, you're not in this alone, and maybe it's okay to let someone care about you." Jake let out a slow breath. "I don't know how to do that." Sophie's fingers lightly brushed against his hand, a soft yet deliberate gesture. "Then let's figure it out together." His chest tightened. He wanted to believe her, to let himself trust her. But a lifetime of disappointment had built walls around his heart, and even now, with Sophie right in front of him, he was terrified of what it meant to let them down. Before he could say anything else, the door swung open and Max came running in, his face lit up with pure joy. "Dad!" Max clambered onto the side of the bed, careful of Jake's injured leg. "You scared me." Jake ruffled his son's hair. "I'm okay, buddy." Max turned to Sophie, his little face scrunched with determination. "Miss Sophie, are you going to take care of my dad now?" Both Jake and Sophie froze. Sophie glanced at Jake, her cheeks slightly flushed. "I think your dad is pretty good at taking care of himself," Max huffed. "Not really. He needs help sometimes." Jake sighed. "Max, no." Max interrupted, his voice serious in a way that only a child's innocence could carry. "You always tell me it's okay to ask for help, Dad, so why can't you?" Jake opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His son, his wise, perceptive son, had just called him out in the most brutally honest way possible. Sophie smiled gently, giving Jake an out. "He's got a point." Jake exhaled heavily. "Yeah, he does." Max beamed. "So, does that mean Miss Sophie is going to be part of our family now?" The question hung in the air, loaded with weight and meaning. Sophie's breath caught, and she looked at Jake, waiting. But she didn't push. She didn't demand an answer. Jake ran a hand down his face. He had spent so much of his life running, from pain, from love, from the possibility of loss. But looking at Max, at Sophie, he realized he had spent even longer denying himself the right to happiness. He turned to Sophie, his voice steady. "If she wants to be." Sophie's eyes softened, something unspoken passing between them. "I do." Max clapped his hands, thrilled with himself for solving the world's biggest problem. "Good! Now can we get pancakes?" Jake laughed, a deep, genuine laugh, and for the first time in a long while the future didn't seem so uncertain. It seemed possible. As they sat together, the warmth of something new settled over Jake. A sense of belonging, a chance at something more than survival. He reached for Sophie's hand again, this time without hesitation, and just like that, the pieces of his broken life started to come together, not because he had finally fixed everything, but because, for the first time, he realized he didn't have to do it alone. Months passed, and life settled into something Jake had never thought possible: stability, happiness, and the unfamiliar warmth of knowing he wasn't alone anymore. His leg had healed well, though he still felt occasional aches when the weather turned cold. The accident had forced him to slow down, to rethink what truly mattered, and in doing so, he had finally let go of the weight he had carried for so long. Sophie had become a part of their lives, in ways that felt natural, as if she had always been there. She never imposed, never tried to take control, just stood by. His side, offering support when he needed it and space when he struggled with accepting it. Max adored her, and Jake often caught himself watching the two of them together, feeling a pang of something he hadn't dared acknowledge before: love. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jake took Sophie and Max to a small house just outside the city. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest home with a backyard big enough for Max to run around in. But it was theirs. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, brick by brick, through love, resilience, and the refusal to give up on one another. Max's eyes went wide as they stepped inside. "Is this—" Jake knelt beside his son, resting a hand on his small shoulder. "Yeah, buddy, this is our home." Max let out an excited squeal and immediately ran through the house, inspecting every room with the kind of joy only a child could have. Sophie stood beside Jake, her gaze soft as she watched Max's excitement. "You did this," she murmured, turning to Jake. "You made this happen." Jake exhaled, a mixture of pride and relief settling over him. "We did this," Sophie smiled, stepping closer. "Jake, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" She hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "I love you." The words hung between them, raw and vulnerable. For the first time in his life, Jake didn't feel the urge to run. He didn't feel the need to guard himself against the possibility of being left behind. Instead, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I love you too." Sophie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close. In that moment, every struggle, every hardship, every painful memory felt like it had led to this, to them, to a life he had never dared to dream of. From the hallway, Max peeked in, grinning from ear to ear. "So, does this mean we're a real family now?" Jake chuckled, pressing a kiss to Sophie's temple before turning to his son. Yeah, Max, we're a real family. Max whooped with excitement and ran outside to explore the backyard. Sophie leaned into Jake, her fingers tracing small circles against his back. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Jake exhaled, looking around the home they had built together, not just the house, but the life, the love, the second chance at something beautiful. He thought of the long, lonely nights when he had doubted whether he could ever be more than a struggling single dad. He thought of the times he had pushed Sophie away, believing that love and happiness weren't meant for him. But now, standing here, with the woman he loved and his son running joyfully in the yard, he realized just how wrong he had been. "For the first time in a long time," he said, his voice steady, "sure. I really am." Sophie smiled, her own eyes misty. "Me too." The golden sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their new beginning. The house, once just a structure, now held the promise of laughter-filled mornings, quiet late-night talks, and a lifetime of love. Jake pulled Sophie into his embrace, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. "I was wrong for thinking I had to do everything alone." She smiled up at him. "You never did." And as they stood there, arms wrapped around each other, watching Max chase fireflies in the backyard, Jake knew this was the life he had fought for, the love he had found, when he least expected it. And he wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from viewers all around the world. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where a small act of kindness changed everything? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment and appreciate your support. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another heartwarming story. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you inspiring narratives that stay with you long after the story ends. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.